Welcome to the Room of Lives. I'm your host, Neil. This is Hot Take on Reality number 2. Okay, so humans tend to think of life as having multiple possibilities. But the radical idea here is there is only one possibility, which is what's really happening, with no alternative. At some point, this discussion gets a bit tangled up in arguments about mathematical probability, but I do think that's somewhat related. Okay, so a little bit of a personal story before I start, because it's relevant. When I was in high school, the internet was not like how it is today. There were like more things that now feel like kind of more quaint. And one of them was a website called veritasserum.com. Veritasserum.com, have you heard of it? Do you know what it was?
I didn't realize... Wait, is it different than the YouTube channel?
Yeah.
Okay, then I don't know what it is.
This was like, I think 2000s internet or whatever. A website called veritasserum.com, which was like a Harry Potter fan website where there were different things related to Harry Potter. And one of them was a chat room where you go on that and like some Java chat thing opens up and you pick a name for yourself and then you go in and people are just chatting in that room. Mm-hmm. People my age, I guess, high school. It was so novel. And I was doing this. And there was a girl there, I think, who I started to chat with. And and I liked talking to her. This is veritasserum.com.
How old were you?
I don't know. I mean, whatever, high school. Towards the end of high school. Right before undergrad. I kind of liked her, I guess. And we were just like talking to each other. And at some point, we're like, oh, so where in the world are you from? And it turned out that she's also from India. But you can't tell from all of these chat handles. And then it turned out that we are from the same city.
Catfish.
And then it turned out that we go to the same school. And that she's 1 year above me. And we arranged to meet in school. We did not used to have cell phones at that time. So I just met this girl on this international chat website called veritasserum.com. Turned out that we go to the same school. And so so basically she ended up being my first girlfriend. Okay?
Wow.
And I would look back on that story and think, what are the odds of that happening? Like you basically go on like a global chat site. You find someone who you go to the same building with every day.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So I started thinking, oh, that's kind of miraculous. That's like really, there's something like really special about it, right? And a lot of people think about these things in this way where something kind of fortuitous happens and like, oh my God, what are the odds of that? And Richard Feynman was someone who used to kind of like be like more logical about these things. And he was in one of his things, Richard Feynman is this like American physicist who got the Nobel Prize. And he, in one of his lectures, he was like, well, on the way here to the lecture, I was in my car and I stopped at a red light and there were other cars around me. What are the odds that I would be in a red light with those cars, with those specific number plates? You know, you could think, okay, the odds are pretty low. But then when you think about it, you're like, what does that mean? What are the odds? Like, what does it mean to say, what are the odds that I would have talked to this girl? Like, when we talk about odds...
When you say odds, like, it's only the chance of something happening, but it's like, it's either going to happen or it's not.
Yeah.
And when something so rare does happen, it's like, okay, well, the odds could have been really low, but the fact that it happened, like, it's...
Yeah. So I was basically like, I don't understand what odds means. Like, I actually had difficulty when the concept of probability, I started learning in school and whatever. I was like, I don't really understand what probability means. What does it mean?
That's funny,
like when you
it's
toss
like one of the like simplest, because there's a lot of like crazy physics stuff I don't understand, but probability was like, except conditional probability is hard. When it's like A intersection B and shit like that. But
Yeah.
it's like, oh, there's X number of possibilities, and then
That's my
you're
thing.
just like-
I think there is actually only one possibility. And the X number of possibilities is an imaginary construct within the human mind.
Okay.
And that's the imagination we go into, the possibility of universes different than what happened, which makes us say, what are the odds of that? You're like, oh, actually, in like the number of possibilities, this is very low probability. But actually, there was just one thing that happened.
it was always
The
gonna happen.
idea of alternatives to
It's
what is
just
happening
imagination.
is an imagination. So the radical idea is there is no alternative to what is happening. However, humans among all of the different species have particularly rich imagination capabilities. So we repeatedly get drawn into this mental framework of considering life as one of many possibilities. And I think we're the animal that does this the most. Like they're like maybe dogs and cats or whatever. Their lives are not always going well. Suppose that something happens and this dog is in pain, living out the rest of its life in pain. They don't sit around thinking, oh, it would have been so nice if this had not happened. You know, what are the odds that this happened? It's just pain. There's no like narrative structure on top of it. But human beings, like a lot of them, spend time in regret, for example. I wish this had not happened. And that is just the creation of an alternative to what really happened. And, you know, you can spend a lot of your life in like, I wish this hadn't happened, wish I had done that. Basically, obsessions with imagined alternatives to what is really happening. So I think that's where these things, I feel like human beings entangle themselves in a lot of like confusions because of our a fictitious idea of alternatives that's just so baked into our thinking.
We create our own suffering.
Yeah.
But there's certain things that you can do that make certain outcomes more likely. Like you make a choice associated with it, but it's like going on the motorcycle. Like that's inherently like the probability there is how many people get on motorcycles in 1 year and how many of them crash and get injured. That is a statistic, which we can say is probability of it happening to you.
Yeah, that's what the mumbo jumbo happens. It's like out of 100 times in the past, 98 times this happened. Therefore what exactly? Like, I don't understand what it means to say
It's highly
something.
likely that it can happen.
What
It's
is
highly
that?
likely that this activity leads to this outcome.
Yeah, I know that those are the words that are used to describe that, but...
Well, so I'm curious, like with this idea that there's only one outcome, but it's more just there's only one observable outcome.
I mean, everything is observation. What is beyond it?
Right, but what I'm saying is like just because we can't observe it doesn't mean that it's not a possible outcome. Right?
I don't know what possible means. Possible is an imagination.
Sure.
Possible is an extrapolation of what is actually happening.
But don't you think that there are smaller, more controlled events where you can see the notion of possible outcomes?
Yeah.
Over time, right? Like if you're
if
rolling
you toss
dice.
a coin 3 times,
Yeah.
then it wasn't just a possibility. 2 times it was actually heads, 1 time it was tails.
Right.
And you can say, but those were not 3 possibilities of the same event happening. They were 3 different events that happened.
Sure.
And now if I say right now, whatever is happening is one of many possibilities, then those are not things that are happening. They're just kind of in your mind.
But I think maybe like so the flip of a coin, the roll of a dice, like they don't seem to have any linear dependence on the other thing. Right? Like there's no causal effect of the prior dice's outcome with the next.
It kind of is. Well, not maybe the prior dice's outcome, but the moment that you're tossing the coin, everything about the atoms and molecules is exactly predetermined. And you're tossing the coin,
but you can't
and there's
predict
going to be one outcome.
I mean, you could if you had a really, really like sophisticated model of that. So all probability is doing is it's saying like, let's drastically simplify our model.
Yeah, it's trying to predict something that we can't. It's like a simplification of prediction, saying that this X number of times when this was possible occurrence, like what actually happened in similar scenarios.
Yeah.
And I think because it is a simplification, it exists without access to being able to say with certainty, which is why it's like, yeah, like if that horse race.
But there's also something else where I feel like when I ask what is probability, the answer is always circular, which like it says, okay, 80 times out of 100 this thing has happened.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, that's the probability of it happening in the future. I'm like, oh, use that word again.
So
it's circular because it rests on some kind of a hunch or intuition that things in the future will be like what they have. It's like a hunch. That's why it keeps doing circles around that hunch.
But it's not just a hunch, right? Like
yeah.
There all the laws of nature
Mm-hmm.
are constant. So it's not just a hunch that we don't expect the table to start floating.
Yeah.
Like it's never going to start floating. Like you can believe it might in the next minute, but it never will.
Yeah.
So it's like that's like I think that's the same internal like cognitive engine where we're like some things just tend to stay the same or to stay consistent.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like I think then instead of me contemplating the existence of a table, it's like I contemplate the more abstract idea of like the outcome of an event.
Yeah.
Which I think is
There's like another thing about that. Like for example, you can say if you get on a motorcycle, statistics are that 8 times out of 10 you do not survive the first time you get on a motorcycle. Let's just say that. Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, I believe in the consistency of the universe. Therefore, if I get on a motorcycle the next time, I will imagine that I'll have 80% chance of dying.
Sure.
Now someone comes and says, what does that mean? 80% chance of dying? What does that mean? Does it mean that you get on the motorcycle, you are going to die? And you're like, no, I might die. So I'm like, okay, what does that mean then to say 80% instead of 70%? You might die, might not die. You can just say that. What does that number mean? Are you going to get on the motorcycle 10 times and out of those 10 times, 8 times you're going to die? What does it mean? That 80%.
I see what you're saying. And I think like when I think about it where I'm like, okay, like maybe 80% of the time, like people don't get in motorcycle accidents, but that doesn't mean that that doesn't make me safe when I get on the motorcycle, that it's unlikely for me to get hurt, like, or likely, you know, it doesn't mean that I will, it doesn't mean that I won't, like, it really doesn't mean anything for what action you're about to take, but it helps inform you of, like,
I don't understand, like, that's the part, like, what does it tell you? So you could say...
It tells you what has happened in the past, and you can either say, like, okay, these conditions apply to me or they don't, or they're going to help me or they don't. But there's always, like, it is describing, like, an uncertainty. But it's also helping us to make informed decisions, or what we would consider informed decisions, in the face of uncertainty.
That's what I'm doubting, the informed decision part. So, like, what is the information? So you could say, okay, for example...
But how do you make an informed decision? You're saying you can't.
I don't know.
Because if it's like, it's just a tool.
Well, I guess, okay, so, like, I think another, like... I'm trying to think of a good example where, like, again, the probability is not, like, teaching you much about the...
Okay, I was about to finish, like, a thought there.
Go.
Okay, so suppose someone says this is a coin and it's a loaded coin, so there's 70% chance of a head. Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, I don't know what that means. You could say, well, the past 10 times I tossed it, it was 6 times. I was like, well, that's not 70%. I'm like, oh, okay, well, actually, I mean 70% because if you do it infinite times, it's 7, out of every 10. I'm like, oh, did you do it infinite times? Oh, no, I didn't. I just think it's that, or whatever. You could just say it. And you're like, okay, what does it, how does it inform us about the future? You could say, all right, if I toss the coin, it's more likely that it will be heads than tails. I'm like, how much more likely? Is it definitely going to be heads? Like, no, 70% doesn't mean definitely. I'm like, okay, is it definitely going to be tails? No. Okay, well, what can you tell me? You're like, okay, it's not definitely going to be heads. However, if you do it this many times, if you do it 10 times, you're going to get heads 7 times. That's what 70% is. Like, oh, am I really going to get it 7 times? Oh, no, I'm not sure. You could get it 6, even though it's 70%, it could be 6 or 5 or 4. It can be 0 or 1. I'm like, so what the fuck are you telling me? Oh, that's called a binomial. If you do the 10 times thing, many times, actually there will be a distribution. Sometimes you'll get 7, sometimes you'll get 6, sometimes you'll get 5. But the most probable one is going to be 7 out of 10. I'm like, what does that mean? Most probable one? You're like, oh, the more likely. I'm like, what does that mean? Oh, if you do this experiment 100 times, then that thing will be more. It's just circular. I'm like, oh, you still haven't told me what 70% heads probability means. You just keep going around in circles of what other probabilities that implies and what other probabilities that implies. You never come down to anything definite. So this is all like a thought up mental jungle, which arises due to our imagination of alternative realities.
Because people use it a lot, and they seem
for
to find it
science.
useful.
Okay, but I wanted to make a philosophical conclusion to what I was saying,
Mhm.
a little bit further away from the argumentative aspect of it,
Mhm.
which is that I wanted to tie it to, this humans have these obsessions with alternatives to reality, and I feel like it does cause a lot of pain. I feel like a lot of the spiritual path is kind of the recognition that we hold life at arm's length. It's kind of, I don't like this part. It's kind of like a hot thing, and you're holding it there. I kind of don't like what's going on right now. Because
There was this podcast I listened to, and it was interviewing this lady who's a psychic. And, people come to psychics oh, tell me my future, tell me this and that. And she's she had a really hard time with that because, yes, she can, see these things, but she basically described that people's futures just looked she described them as all these, silver kind of strings, where it's all of these are possibilities for you. I can't tell you which one's going to happen because each of them depends on the choices that you're going to make. So it's not I can say with certainty that you're going to end up in this future because any one of these are possible. But it's you have an infinite amount of choices that lead to one future or another, which was kind of interesting, where it's it's kind of what you're talking about though, where it's people are thinking of these parallel realities or but past tense, but you can also think about it going forward. But I always think one of the things that I kind of think of is I do say that things were meant to be, and the only reason I say that is because it happened. It's it was meant to be because this is what happened, because the other thing didn't happen, so that wasn't meant to be, and that's the sole explanation you have to have for us because it did happen. It's not some
you can't say
thing.
some alternative that didn't happen. You can never say that was meant to be.
Yeah.
And oh, that didn't.
And when you say something was meant to be, people think it's deeper, but sometimes I'm well, it happened, so it was meant to be.
Yeah.
And that was the only thing that was maybe ever gonna happen.
Yeah.
But I think it's true that a lot of times if something happens that you don't like, it can feel you're this wasn't meant to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and I think that's why you have to adopt that mindset, because there is this depending on the nature of the event and how you feel about it, it can force you into a place where all you do is you contemplate how it could have been different.
Yeah.
Right.
But then you can go on the flip side of that and say oh, why did it happen? And you can backtrack.
What can I learn from it?
Or what can I learn from it? Yeah.
Right. Well, and I think that's what the brain is trying to do. Is it's okay, this outcome, I hate it. Let's never let this happen again.
Yeah.
What sense can I make out of this to avoid feeling this emotional pain or avoid this outcome? Right.
Yeah. And I'm saying all of that happening is the only possible happening. Your brain thinking about those things, your brain making up the notion of probability, your brain imagining things that could have happened a different way, and backtracking from that and learning from this, imagined the psychic seeing multiple strands. All of that is just part of the one thing that's happening,
But I guess
including
the reason why
ideas of alternatives.
probability is never going to be satisfactory because it's trying to do something that is impossible to do, which is predict the future. Which is not necessarily impossible to do, but again, it's the only way to exactly predict the future is to perfectly model reality at its current state and know how all the things it'd be having an exact replica of the world is the only way to like effectively predict what's going to happen next.
I would say, okay, maybe like what I was thinking about is like probability is this kind of like heuristic distillation of knowledge. So it's like instead of giving you the knowledge, so like say you have like a weighted dice, right? So it's like you could say like its center of mass is closer to the 6 side or whatever, and when it's like tumbling, like these are all the orientations that if it loses certain momentum, it will still fall onto like I guess the opposite of the 6, whatever that is, right? So it's like you could tell somebody that, and you could tell them exactly where that center of mass is, and so they themselves could calculate then the probabilities, or you can just be like it's a weighted dice. Yeah, it's a weighted dice. Heads, like it goes, prefaces this one thing, and that's just a heuristic distillation. It's not actually giving you.
But the fact that the heuristic works, I don't know why it works.
Oh, why does it work?
Like what
does it work?
It kind of does. If you tell someone there's a loaded dice and they're going and gambling,
it works. It works when you're a betting man. Exactly.
Yeah, because if you know the odds, then but the odds are not happening in like a
cards are like a good way to study odds, because cards, like odds are odds. There's no like physics. I mean, they're shuffling the deck, but there's a 1 in 52 chance of any given card coming out.
Yeah,
the first card.
If you're the kind of person who's just getting into like learning probabilities, and you're gonna play blackjack or something, and you calculate the odds right, and after the first game you get a really unlikely outcome, and you say this is wrong, then you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
So kind of like anything goes.
Well, it goes in the long run. I think it's statements about the long run. If you can recreate the scenario many times over.
Like imagine you got a coin and you just started tossing in your room and you just kept getting heads, and it could be like, oh my god, this is crazy, and it's not a weighted coin or anything. It's just, and you're like, oh my god, that's crazy.
Dude, this sometimes happens with your experiments. I'll get like, I'm like,
you could be like, this is not supposed to happen. The probability is supposed to be 50%, and someone would come in and say, there's no supposed to. You're like, okay, well then, what were you telling me when you said that the probability is 50%? This is crazy, right? I'm like, oh, there is a chance that could happen.
Well,
even though it's 50%, like, what are the chances? Low. So this shouldn't have happened. Oh, low chances doesn't mean it can't happen. So there's just, are you really making any statement at all?
Well, no, but the statement of a coin flip is not making a statement. The statement of a coin flip is saying there are 2 possible outcomes, and I have no knowledge. That's kind of
the point of it.
Right? No, it's not like no knowledge.
It is.
Yes,
it's not like no knowledge. It's like I know that they're both equally likely. That's not the same thing as saying no knowledge.
What would you say if you had no knowledge?
No knowledge means just you know nothing about the probability distribution. Here you know the probability distribution is uniform.
But you have no knowledge of whether you're going to get heads or tails.
Yeah. So how is it different from saying I don't know anything about it? How is it different from saying it's 60-70?
Yeah, that's fair. You're right.
How can you have an experiment that distinguishes conclusively about whether that was a 50-50 or a 60-70? Give me an experiment. How do you know which one was correct? You can say anything.
With a single experiment versus like many.
I give you like a coin, and I say the odds of this is like a not weighted coin. This is 50-50 head.
The odds don't depend on the experiment. The odds depend on the coin itself, because there are 2 sides, and you can land on one or the other. So if you know the coin is not weighted, it doesn't matter if you do an experiment to like prove that. Like that's the setup of the coin is like enforcing that.
Yeah, but it's like phenomenologically you say 50-50, because if it's like unweighted, what does it mean?
And so you're saying
probability definition is like, what is the definition? How do you know the difference between 50-50 and 70?
And you're saying if I perform an experiment and I get an outcome that like over many trials averages about 50% heads, 50% tails, it could still be the 70-30 distribution and just a really, really unlikely outcome.
Yeah.
Well, and it is the
what does that statement mean? Really, when push comes to shove, you can't say anything.
Okay.
Then what were you saying?
No. Okay. So that statement means like, again, like it's like
But again, I think we're talking about one instance versus hundreds of instances.
Yeah. So where do you draw the line and say, now I know it's 50-50 and not 30-70? Does law of probability tell you where to stop?
I mean, it narrows the band, right?
Well, how? It's a probabilistic narrowing.
Yeah,
there is no. It doesn't say that anything. Like you can say, there is no band, by the way. That is the binomial distribution that I was talking about, which itself has errors on whatever. It doesn't. You can take a 50-50 coin and toss it 10 trillion times, and there is a probability that you will get all heads.
Sure. No, but what I'm saying is isn't there like a distribution that tells you like what is the likelihood of this observable?
Yeah.
If you assume
that's yet another probability. So I can tell you, if you do it 10 trillion times and get all heads, the probability is not 0. The probability is 0.00 whatever.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you
what's your issue with that?
I'm just saying you're not saying anything with the probability. It's just a number that you're making up backwards from whatever happened.
Well, okay, so isn't that like it's
not predicting anything. Really.
So are you saying that well, it can't predict anything. It's telling you.
Yeah.
Well, it is trying to predict. It's trying to
what
say.
What does it even tell you?
It is to predict.
Yeah, like there is.
What is it telling?
But it can't predict. It can't tell you exactly what's going to happen.
No, and I don't know what it even is telling me. Like I came and said, hey, I can help you predict the future. This coin is 30%
but you're
tail,
not helping me
70%
predict the future.
heads.
You're helping describe how likely something might be.
So you don't agree that it helps predict the future?
No, I don't think you can. I think it helps you understand the uncertainty or like the possibilities but like you inherently know that there are multiple possible outcomes. Like if you knew.
What if I inherently don't know that? That's what the whole.
Well, then you're not going to be able to accurately describe the probability space. If you can't
Which I think is a hoax
possible...
anyway. That's what my point is. I don't care about describing probabilities because I think it's a hoax.
My point is I think probability is useful, and I guess you don't.
I think there are no alternatives to you finding probability useful.
The funniest thing about this is
that had to happen in this universe.
You've literally written code and software to like manipulate probability distributions. Yeah. That's really fun.
That's just something that does. I mean, once you define those constructs, you can do math with it.
Right.
But to say that the real world is a probabilistic machine, or that the real world computes its future state or whatever, as one out of many possibilities, that's kind of like an imagination, I think.
So you're saying like even like, so it's like you're like, oh yeah, it could be 70-30 coin, could be 50-50, and over many trials you like see. You're saying even the statement, either one, literally can't be true.
I don't know what it means.
Sure.
I don't know what a mathematician means when they say this is 50-50 coin versus 70-30 coin. I'm like, what are you exactly telling me?
So it's all useless because you don't understand what it means.
I'm saying they have never been able to explain other than circular terms. Mathematicians have never been able to explain in other than circular terms. Wait. So I'm like, that's not very mathematic of you. You're just making up something.
But it's axiomatic. You have to.
No, like, what is the axiom? I don't know.
Well, okay, so this is. I mean, I can't believe we haven't brought up like Bayesian and frequentist. Whatever. Blah blah blah. I mean, that's why people have.
But
a problem
those are also circular.
Sure. I mean, I think
you were gonna say something.
Yeah.
No, you made a distinction between real world and not. What did you mean by that? When he said in the real world just now.
What did I say in the rest of that sentence?
It was a response to what Ali had said. Whatever.
Oh, he was being...
I wanted to mention that. What do you mean by real world?
I don't know what I mean by real world.
Well, his response to me was something like, there was no other thing that you would believe because this exact thing happened in the real whatever.
I was like
that sort of thing.
The only universe that's unfolding is the one in which Ali finds probability useful. Because so I'm not shocked by that. We can be believing in these things. That's not.
And so you're saying like how do you ever know if it's really being useful? Is that the question?
Yeah, I'm not even sure what information I can say I have a number hidden here and it's between 1 and 10 and it's divisible by 2. You know, so you can narrow down and say like what exactly I'm saying. It's either like 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 or 10. Okay, and if I
But
slowly
it's only one thing.
Yeah,
So
and
there's
if I
no
keep
chance of it being any of the other things, even within the range of quote unquote possibilities, because you already chose. It's only one.
yeah, so I'm just saying that if I keep revealing information about it, at some point you like know something. You're like, okay, it's 4.
But the thing is,
With
it's
probabilities,
like
I don't know what information you're communicating.
Well, that was like a probabilistic like thing you just described. Because you're like, oh, it's a number between 1 and 4, so like, okay.
Yeah.
If I'm trying to guess something without knowing what the answer is, I'm going to say, okay, well, these possibilities are equally likely. But I'm not going to be like disappointed. Like, maybe I'll be disappointed, like, personally, if I don't guess it right. But like, I will know that it's like, oh, I guessed it wrong, no fault of my own. Like, this is all I could understand is like what the quote unquote chances of this happening were. But you're using it just to describe an outcome that you don't know.
If someone is not already familiar with the idea of probability from a gut level, none of these words would make any sense to them, I think. Because you keep coming back to like maybe and likely and probably.
But that's not like...
No one would understand.
Can you give me a definition of probability without using the idea of chance or probability or likeliness?
You can't define anything without using other words that inherently have definitions.
No, I'm talking about just avoid circular definitions.
Mm-hmm.
You can use other words that don't come back to probability. Is it possible to do that?
I mean, I think there's like we have an intuition that's grounded in, again, like our experience of nature, right? Like there are some phenomena that we don't think about. Every day the sun comes up. Every day the sun goes down.
Yeah.
Some other phenomena, like weather,
we
do think about.
Yeah.
Because it affects us, because it's unreliable.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't happen the same way every time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I think it's when, like, for those things that happen sometime, like just knowing when it's going to happen some of the time.
What is some of the time?
But you also
I mean, but you know what that is. You know what it is. You experience it with all these phenomena that are...
So you have to have this like intuitive. It kind of comes from like a gut feeling.
Right.
And a gut feeling is...
It's not just a gut feeling.
Like a law of induction.
Well,
I'm not saying just a gut feeling as a way of invalidating the phenomenology of where it comes from.
Right.
I'm just saying, but at its base, it's a gut feeling. It's not a derived concept in the mind, but you have worked backwards from this gut feeling to create this branch of math.
Yes.
That has this word that's a sit-in for gut feeling.
Totally.
And all I'm trying to say is that, hey, this thing is not a mathematical concept really. Because when you try to define it, you come back to using its definition, and it's just this gut feeling that it's part of what you might call common sense.
Sure.
You know, so.
Well, but I think it's also like it's. I think it is a rigorization of that to an extent. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Like I think it suffers because it suffers from the absence of human intuition, which is a lot of what, like, if you like work on a farm or you do these things or that things that are like involve a lot of like negotiating those kinds of things. You learn over time, and you maybe don't learn correctly. You maybe like find a local optimum, and you maybe get to the point where you're no longer incorporating new information at the same rate that you were when you were first just accruing your gut sense. Right. So it's like, I think it's a formalization of the gut sense that like is immune to sort of like the human problems of like the mind becoming just sufficient.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's still like, if you think about it though, it's still a kind of like an imagination construct, because what is going to happen is just one thing. It's not going to be multiple things. So when we say that it said on the weather that it was 70% chance of showers, we have some kind of a mental imagination that if the world were to play itself out in the next 24 hours 10 times, in 7 of those times it would be showering, raining. So I don't want to step out of the home. It's some kind of a mental like simulation thing that happens, and you're like, okay.
Mhm.
But I'm trying to draw the attention to the fact that actually only one thing is ever happening.
I think weather
Like
would
in that-
probably relate to that sentiment.
What's that?
I feel like people who use probability probably like relate to that sentiment just as much as you do. So I don't think that they're like trying to fool anybody. But
I
there's no other
understand,
way
yeah.
to do their jobs.
I think there is actually a little bit of a slippery slope because I feel like for humans, the boundary between reality and imagination is often blurry, and our concepts, we become so habituated to them that we really start acting and believing like they're real. For example, a person who has spent their entire life regretting some decision. I wish I hadn't done that. You can go and say, this just does not make sense.
Mhm.
You know, if I hadn't done that, today I would be here. I'm like, that's just like a mental thing where you're imagining an impossible alternative to the only reality that happened. But we get tied up by this, whatever we say, oh, that's just like a useful idea. And everyone knows it's not true. But yeah, I really want a lot of money. That's real, you know, or something like that. I think like people actually do get caught up. When you have like a 40-minute long conversation where I'm like pointing it out, it's kind of easier to say, oh yeah, these people don't. But we go around a lot of the time implicitly believing in the ideas of alternatives to reality in our head. And I think we do a scary amount of the time. We are looking at the world and weighing it against the world that we would rather be in. Like all the time, actually. It's not just a vague concept at the back of our head. Physically, we are recoiling from the world as it is happening to some extent. And always imagining, like this is the craving and aversion.
Mhm.
We are always like imagining something that would have been better in place of some parts of what's happening. Like, I wish I were making this much money. Or I wish I hadn't fucking torn my ligament, you know. Or, you know, just a bunch of other things. Like, you're fucking hot and sweaty. You're like, I wish I wasn't this sweaty right now. We are doing it implicitly like all the time. We are imagining an alternative to what is happening. And we're imagining there is some possibility that it could be happening this other way. It's not. But this is the only way. Like, even your helpless imagining of the other worlds is the only thing that could be happening then. But it's just a collapsing of your mind into like different possibilities. The only possibility is still the one possibility, which is taking you at that moment through that imagination. That's still just one thing happening. And it never became two. It was always one thing happening, including us believing so fervently in the notion of other possibilities and its quantas and whatever. That's part of the one script.
And so you're kind of advocating for this idea that like you like, do you feel like if for the rest of your life that never happened again in your mind, like
What never happened?
any contemplation of any realities that other than the one that was taking place,
Yeah.
you would still
Sounds kind of dangerous.
like, well, this is the thing. I think what you're saying is that you would still navigate the world exactly whatever.
No, I'm not saying that.
You're not.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying whether or not I contemplate realities other than what's happening, there's actually just one reality happening.
You're saying both of those are just like
Yeah.
sub-items.
And
within
it
the
sounds
larger
like
reality.
a kind of like an obvious thing to say, but I feel like sometimes when I like really sink into the meaning of that, that's when like the power of that statement actually hits me. It's like there is only actually one version of things happening
But I
all
guess
the
there's
time,
positive
like
ways
since
that
the
people
beginning, without
use
fail.
it and don't, because like making a movie, writing a story, like
Yeah.
imagination in general is always like thinking about something that's not actually happening or didn't happen or will never happen, and except in like your fictitious like rendition of it.
Yeah.
So
No, you can
it's
always
like-
imagine.
But I
Definitely,
hear what
that's
you're
cool.
saying. It's like
I'm
I
saying
know.
it's harder these days for us to really imagine or
these
remember.
days,
Yeah, because we spend way too much time in like in different kinds of like thought constructs, like that are not like hard reality. Like,
it's hard because like your mind
mhm.
is exposed to so much more of the world than people were in the past. Like
Yeah.
I have
Because
to
of the
actively like just enforce like tunnel vision to just get through the damn day, because it's like, oh, I could get lost in thinking about like the world at large, but that's not going to help me like get through my day.
Yeah.
It's like I feel bad sometimes for not like keeping up with current times, other than like reading headlines in the newspaper when I get a freaking crossword. But like, it's just not healthy for me to like be aware of all this stuff, but it's constantly bombarding us, like, and the worry around it, because you see a lot of the problems around the world, but like you just, yeah, you're just exposed to so much more, and you're exposed to so many alternate realities then to like your life, that it allows you to like actually see a range of possibilities that would have been harder for you to think up in the first place.
Yeah.
And you've got all these other ones at your fingertips, like, oh, well, it would be possible to like just meet a new person on this dating app like tomorrow if I wanted to. Like,
Yeah.
there's just so much more at people's fingertips.
Just imagine tracing back our evolution from the humans to the primates to where there was no imagination of alternative realities. And it's still an animal just going through life, but not really imagining
Now he's like, damn,
anything
I
else
wish
other
I
than
got
just
that
what's
ibex.
happening. You know?
Like, he could have wished he got it.
It's a distinctively human trait. I mean, I think it's what makes us human.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
In
almost
good ways
like
and
raging
bad.
In
against
good and
something
bad,
that's
yeah.
in your nature. And when
Yeah.
I think back to that, I'm like, they're there, Allie. Like, you know, cut yourself some slack. Like, you're like hard coded to do this shit. So like, it's
Yeah.
not like something to be hard on yourself about. But
Yeah.
you can think about it, reflect on it, and decide to like take actions differently because you recognize it. But it's like, I'm not gonna beat myself up over it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be a way to maintain like faith. That's how religion works too. Like,
What could be a
like
way?
imagining scenarios.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of what you're saying is like that in the act of trying to navigate purportedly like multiple outcomes in life, you have emotions about it, and navigating those emotions are hard, right? Like if it was a completely emotionally neutral experience to contemplate and navigate, and then in retrospect try and like update your model, there wouldn't be any of the suffering that's involved.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's really like kind of maybe the underlying statement is it's like maybe because we misunderstand our like deeper relation to reality, we have like attachment to these imagined worlds or possibilities that create dissonance.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
make you feel bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's how you should state probability. If you make this choice, you'll be angry.
Yeah. Or yeah, something like that, you know. I mean, we have like, if someone says, if you get on this vehicle, 70% chance you're dying. You get a certain feeling about it. You know?
Yeah. Or it's
And,
like if you get back off that vehicle alive, you will feel lucky.
Yeah. So it has to do with some like hard-coded like feelings that got averaged over past events into our neurochemistry. Yeah. But all of that is the only thing that ever happened.
That's the hot take. That's the hot take.
That's the hot take. I feel like the hot part of the take is like even getting across what I'm trying to say, because it's really, the words are like so obvious. Like, yeah, of course, the universe only had just one history, you know, it just only one thing ever happened. But I feel like when I bring that recognition back into this moment that's unfolding, there's a certain like power in it, which is not just relating in words what I'm saying. So it's kind of like a funny intro to start with how I met this girl, and then talk about, oh, probability never made much sense to me. And the other thing also is like, oh, this world is probably a simulation. We talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the number of simulated worlds is going to increase so much. Therefore, the odds that this is a simulated world is more than this is like the real world. I'm like, oh, on what set of on what set of possibilities are we computing these probabilities?
Mm-hmm.
Were there actually multiple instantiations? What does probability mean when you talk about this plus some other universe? It's just so many minefields of weird, like, not rigorous concepts. But I was trying to go through all of that to come to something which is not actually really about arguments anymore. It just has to do with a certain feeling that I get when I think of everything happening as just one possibility. In other words, it's like so absolute in the sense that you cannot flippantly think, oh, this could have been otherwise. Mm-hmm. Even though your mind allows you to think that over the course of a human life, it couldn't have been otherwise. And the recognition that it was just one thing while allowing for the possibility or imagination of others, it just makes it very powerful. It's like, oh, every moment is just this very powerfully moving thing which just traces one trajectory.
Well, and it's like...
Which, did I
in
even
a
have
sense,
anything to do
it
with
can
that?
be kind of a relief.
Yeah, it is a relief. For me, it's a relief. I'm like, there are so many like, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? Should I have said this thing 5 minutes? I'm like, oh, that's the only fucking thing that happened with no other alternative. Yeah. Including worrying about, whatever.
Yeah, this makes me think of like, it's like, if like there is like the window of your moment to moment experience, like, and then this is the future, that's the past.
Yeah.
Like we're stuck in here, and I feel like most of the time you have like your face pressed to one of the panes of glass. Like you're like either like you're trying to get your hands into the future, trying to like whatever, or like things just got behind you, like trying to get. And like I think what you're saying is like you don't have to do anything.
Yeah. Well,
and it'll still go through.
Yeah,
and you're still right where you are.
Yeah.
You're still not getting out of those two panes of glass. And also it's like it requires no effort on your part.
Yeah.
For your reality to just keep sifting through.
That might happen for 5 minutes, and then after 5 minutes, you might feel like, no, I gotta get off my ass and do something.
Even that.
That too will just be what would have happened.
Well, it's like when people, like, the regret thing about, oh, I had these two decisions and I made the wrong one. Like, you were never going to make the other decision. It may have felt like an option, but something... all these like culmination of events led you to make the decision you made. So there was no
and even
reality
though
in
it
which
might
you
be irrational, the fact that you spent 38 years of your life regretting it is what would have happened.
Right. Exactly. Because you did it and it happened and everything led you to it.
How did you pick 38? That seems so specific.
I don't know. I just took a number.
That's the number of years that Dorothy Zbornak on The Golden Girls was married to her husband before he left her.
It sounds like a very special number to you, young
lady. It's one of my favorite shows. But it was like an oddly specific number. It's like, oh wow, just before the 40-year mark. Like, damn.
Yeah. But dude, think about this. Like, the universe was like 16.4 billion years old, and it traced a single trajectory to this moment, which had to happen. I know. Thanks for hanging out with me and my friends in the Room of Lives. In the next and last episode, I share how over the course of my life, I have traversed a path from scientific materialist skepticism towards believing more unprovable ideas that are subjective, spiritual, or paranormal. Since I've seen both worlds and understand a bit of both perspectives, I'm bummed that they stay separate and would love to form bridges between them. However, for a number of reasons, it is also starting to seem to me as if these two kinds of knowledge or experience have certain properties due to which they want to stay away from each other, like oil and water.